So we might make a start and a few other people might join us or not. Some of you were at the earlier workshop, so this one's quite different, so hopefully it's more of you talking at the start, just me doing a little bit of input in the middle, but also relying on a couple of video clips and things. One of which is the story of stuff, but because this is only quite a short workshop, instead of playing it for you, I'll just summarise at one point the main points of the story of stuff, but we will watch another one called The Story of Solutions. Has anyone seen The Story of Stuff?
No.
Yeah, okay, so when you go home you'll be inspired to watch it, but it's just a group's attempt to kind of tell quite briefly the story of what's going on ecologically in the world and what are some things we can do about it. But the first one, The Story of Stuff, was really what's going on in the world, and then they made a subsequent one, The Story of Solutions, to try and move people into some kind of hopeful response instead of being left sitting there going, and they've also done things like The Story of Bottled Water and The Story of Electronics and so on. So anyway, we'll have a look at a bit of that in a minute. So the kinds of questions that I'm thinking we'll engage with today is about the future. So we've kind of had some information this morning in the main session about the past and where the church was and what's been going on in the world. And in the workshop we did earlier, we were looking at the story of kind of life and humanity up to this point. This one's looking at what's the future and what are the different ways of viewing the future. So the question in the kind of secular field is, well, how do we create a sustainable society or a just and fair future? In the religious sphere, it's kind of has been, how do we have eternal life? About 2,000 years ago, a religious leader asked Jesus that question, and Jesus answered him with a parable, the Samaritan, that absolutely everybody listening would have hated at the time, and we'll get back to why that might have been in a little while. And of course, I'm not saying they're exactly the same question, a sustainable society and eternal life, but there's significant overlap. And for a Christian like myself who doesn't pin their hopes on an eternal heaven somewhere up there, they become an even more similar question. So I spent the first half of my life in the secular sphere, wanting to either be a marine biologist or a vet. Studied zoology, then instead of becoming a vet, became a Christian, and so I did actually get into vet science, but I only lasted 1 week, and well, this is far too much for me. And then from then on, I've been lucky enough to be able to kind of spend quite a lot of time exploring that link between ecology and environment and faith, and how it all comes together. And so what I'm hoping to do, but one thing that's kind of interests and concerns me is the stories we tell ourselves about the future and where we're heading, both in the religious sphere and in the secular sphere. Okay, so just another quick thing that I'm interested to know in a group like this. If I can just get you all to stand up. And I'm not going to explain the question, so whatever it means to you. What's that? It's not there. So, how optimistic are you for the future? Okay. This is 0, no optimism at all. And this is 10. Unless you're a 10, yes. So kind of distribute yourself along that line, just from no optimism or hope for the future to a 10. Wow. Optimistic. What do you think you are? What number would you put yourself at? 0 to 10. That's 4. You're about 3 there. This is probably 5 there. You're a 4. Alright. So, why are you 4? You're a 4 Don't stand down the front unless you want to be. And are you happy to tell us why, if you're a 5-ish age?
Yeah, 5, 6, or 6.
Or 6.
I'm a little, I don't know really what to expect in the future. I mean, you're looking at sort of you're looking at social issues, you're looking at, and I'm more scientifically inclined, so I'm looking at climate change, all that sort of stuff, and a direct correlation between human involvement and that. And it's, you can't know what's happening in that regard, but, I have some faith that, even if it's a minority, I don't know if it's a minority or majority that care enough to care about those issues that affect us as well as the world.
Okay. Elizabeth, are you happy to tell us why you're there?
What is we're both about
8.
age? Cheers, good on you. I know my temperament rather than intellect. I'm an optimist. And I'm an academic, so all my analysis makes me a pessimist.
Okay.
But
Screw the facts.
So it's a very interesting position to find yourself in. I think I am hopeful, genuinely. But there's a hell of a lot that we point in the opposite direction. And I'm not resigned as a working man's clock, I'm sort of coming to terms with that. But I just think that actually hope is about making a future and about putting yourself into that in a very committed way. And so that's why rather than fall.
Shelley, are you happy to say where
Yes,
you
I am. If you had asked me this question back in 2008, I would have been about 0. I think the reason I'm hopeful for the future, and the reason why I'm at a 10, is a big part of that has to do with the fact that I'm with overseas treasures. So I think part of that. The other thing I think that what I've seen is that even in it's a little bit like that parable of the mustard seed in Matthew 13, 31 and 32. Even in the worst circumstances, there can still be an element of hope. So I think that, we have all these factors, etc., and things might seem terrible, but I think even in the worst circumstances, there is always places where you can find hope to change things.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a seat. And you were sorry, I forgot your name. You were a 4-ish, did you say? 4-ish. 3.5. So I've just got a 2-minute clip to play for you now. This was made back in the days when 240p was about as high a resolution as you could upload to YouTube without waiting for days, so you probably won't be able to read the text, but you can hear it at least, hopefully. And I just like it.
I am part of a lost generation, and I refuse to believe that I can change the world. I realize this may be a shock, but happiness comes from within is a lie, and money will make me happy. So in 30 years, I will tell my children they are not the most important thing in my life. My employer will know that I have my priorities straight because work is more important than family. I tell you this, once upon a time, families stayed together. But this will not be true in my era. This is a quick fix society. Experts tell me 30 years from now, I will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of my divorce. I do not concede that I will live in a country of my own making. In the future, environmental destruction will be the norm. No longer can it be said that my peers and I care about this earth. It will be evident that my generation is apathetic and lethargic. It is foolish to presume that there is hope. And all of this will come true unless we choose to reverse it. There is hope. It is foolish to presume that my generation is apathetic and lethargic. It will be evident that my peers and I care about this earth. No longer can it be said that environmental destruction will be the norm. In the future, I will live in a country of my own making. I do not concede that 30 years from now, I will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of my divorce. Experts tell me this is a quick fix society, but this will not be true in my era. Families stayed together once upon a time. I tell you this, family is more important than work. I have my priorities straight because my employer will know that they are not the most important thing in my life. So in 30 years, I will tell my children, money will make me happy is a lie, and true happiness comes from within. I realize this may be a shock, but I can change the world, and I refuse to believe that I am part of a lost generation.
See why you like.
I played at one Easter at an ecumenical service, and the Pentecostal minister told me that he nearly got up and turned it off at the middle point. Thought I'd just gone too far. Look, okay, here's another one. Another little thing with neighbours, but maybe, Beth, would you mind coming over to this chair, and then, so you'll be in different pairs. Again, in pairs with no interruptions. So one person talks for 2 minutes and the other person just listens, and they'll tell you and you switch over. If an alien landed on the Earth and asked you, what's the story? What's going on? What's the story? What would you say? Doesn't matter if it takes you a while to kind of think. Pauses are fine. I very much doubt you're going to agree with each other. That doesn't matter. But one person goes first for 2 minutes, and aliens just landed and said, what's the story? What would you tell them? Just out of interest, who's feeling more optimistic than they were when they did that little quiz? Anyone? There are a lot of 10s, so it's a bit hard to get more optimistic than that. Anyone feeling less optimistic having heard the story of what's going on there?
I'm sorry.
Let's see if we can turn that around.
More optimistic having heard John Coates this morning saying that in South Africa they thought racial equality without bloodshed was impossible, but it's more or less happening.
I wonder how much of that is owed to Mandela.
And de Klerk, and Tutu, and a lot of other people,
And Tutu's a great guy.
including John Coates, I would say.
But all
Told
of
me
that.
at lunchtime that he was.
I actually remember a long time ago now when Archbishop Tutu came out to Sydney a long time ago, and he preached somewhere, I'm forgetting where now, I'm not going to argue with it.
Maybe he did elsewhere too, but we're going to do it here.
I thought he went to St James Kingsville too.
No, that's
One occasion. So yeah, I want to. They all had their things to say about being supportive of gay people, saying, it gets around the world. Now that we've joined the ranks of having marriage equality, how can we really go from really to tell the truth? How can we go wrong?
How can we go wrong?
One of the things that we were talking about was, I was 10, but I think that's because I've got, early stages of dementia. But we were saying that the optimism comes from this sort of evolutionary belief that everything's improving, and that the world is getting better. We haven't had world wars for quite a while. We've had other problems, but then the flip side we were discussing was, well, yes, there is a kind of evolutionary process, but along with that improvement comes the other part of evolutionary theory, which is survival of the fittest. And so I guess the whole thing about, which doesn't make me feel less optimistic in an odd way, but, because I suppose it is nature that somehow destruction happens as well, and you just live with it. So while we've got things going better and better, also got the occasional wipeout. That's okay. Goodbye, dinosaurs.
Never be here without a few asteroids. I've decided that I will play you a bit of the story of stuff. The actual clip is about 22 minutes, but I made an 8-minute version of it a few years ago just to kind of tease out some of the main things. And I'll shorten down the bit that I was going to say in the middle. So we'll have the story of stuff, and then I'll do a bit on the 4 kind of possible futures, and then the story of solutions. And hopefully by the time we finish that, sandwich will be well placed to kind of start telling our 2-minute stories. So this pauses every now and then to kind of highlight a point in the story. But as you would have worked out, this workshop's about stories. So here's another one.
We are running out of resources. We are using too much stuff. Now, I know this can be hard to hear, but it's the truth, so we've got to deal with it. In the past 3 decades alone, 1/3 of the planet's natural resource space has been consumed. Gone. We are cutting and mining and hauling and trashing the place so fast that we're undermining the planet's very ability for people to live here. Where I live, in the United States, we have less than 4% of our original forests left. 40% of the waterways have become undrinkable. And our problem is not just that we're using too much stuff, but we're using more than our share. We have 5% of the world's population, but we're using 30% of the world's resources and creating 30% of the world's waste. If everybody consumed at US rates, we would need 3 to 5 planets. And you know what? We've only got 1. So my country's response to this limitation is simply to go take somebody else's. This is the third world, which some would say is another word for our stuff that somehow got on somebody else's land. So what does that look like? The same thing, trashing the place. 75% of global fisheries now are fished at or beyond capacity. 80% of the planet's original forests are gone. In the Amazon alone, we're losing 2,000 trees a minute. That is 7 football fields a minute. And what about the people who live here? Well, according to these guys, they don't own these resources, even if they've been living there for generations. They don't own the means of production, and they're not buying a lot of stuff. And in this system, if you don't own or buy a lot of stuff, you don't have value. So the erosion of local environments and economies here ensures a constant supply of people with no other option. Globally, 200,000 people a day are moving from environments that have sustained them for generations into cities, many to live in slums, looking for work, no matter how toxic that work may be. So you see, it's not just resources that are wasted along this system, but people too. Whole communities get wasted. The golden arrow of consumption. This is the heart of the system, the engine that drives it. It is so important that protecting this arrow has become the top priority for both of these guys. That's why after 9/11, when our country was in shock, and President Bush could have suggested any number of appropriate things, to grieve, to pray, to hope. No, he said to shop, to shop. We have become a nation of consumers. Our primary identity has become that of being consumers, not mothers, teachers, farmers, but consumers. The primary way that our value is measured and demonstrated is by how much we contribute to this arrow, how much we consume. And do we? We shop and shop and shop, keep the materials flowing, and flow they do. Guess what percentage of total materials flow through this system is still in product or use 6 months after their date of sale in North America? 50%? 20? No, 1%. 1. In other words, 99% of the stuff we harvest, mine, process, transport, 99% of the stuff we run through this system is trashed within 6 months. Now, how can we run a planet with that level of materials throughput? It wasn't always like this. The average US person now consumes twice as much as they did 50 years ago. Ask your grandma. In her day, stewardship and resourcefulness and thrift were valued. So how did this happen? Well, it didn't just happen. It was designed. Shortly after World War II, these guys were figuring out how to ramp up the economy. Retailing analyst Victor Lebeau articulated the solution that's become the norm for the whole system. He said, our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, replaced, and discarded at an ever-accelerating rate. President Eisenhower's Council of Economic Advisors chairman said that the American economy's ultimate purpose is to produce more consumer goods. More consumer goods? Our ultimate purpose? Not provide health care or education or safe transportation or sustainability or justice? Consumer goods? How did they get us to jump on board this program so enthusiastically? We see more advertisements in 1 year than people 50 years ago saw in a lifetime. And if you think about it, what's the point of an ad except to make us unhappy with what we have? So 3,000 times a day, we're told our hair is wrong, our skin is wrong, our clothes are wrong, our furniture is wrong, our car is wrong. We are wrong, but it can all be made right if we just go shopping. So in the US, we have more stuff than ever before, but polls show that our national happiness is actually declining. Our national happiness peaked in the 1950s, the same time that this consumption mania exploded. Interesting coincidence. I think I know why. We have more stuff, but we have less time for the things that really make us happy. Friends, family, leisure time. We're working harder than ever. Some analysts say we have less leisure time than any time since feudal society. And do you know what the two main activities are that we do with the scant leisure time we have? Watch TV and shop. In the US, we spend 3 to 4 times as many hours shopping as our counterparts in Europe do. So we're in this ridiculous situation where we go to work, maybe 2 jobs even, and we come home and we're exhausted. So we plop down on our new couch and watch TV, and the commercials tell us you suck. So you got to go to the mall to buy something to feel better, and then you got to go to work more to pay for the stuff you just bought. So you come home and you're more tired. So you sit down and you watch more TV, and it tells you to go to the mall again. And we're on this crazy work, watch, spend treadmill, and we could just stop. But the good thing about such an all-pervasive problem is that there are so many points of intervention. There are people working here on saving forests and here on clean production, people working on labor rights and fair trade and conscious consuming and blocking landfills and incinerators, and very importantly, on taking back our government so that it really is by the people and for the people. All of this work is critically important, but things are really going to start moving when we see the connections, when we see the big picture. When people along this system get united, we can reclaim and transform this linear system into something new, a system that doesn't waste resources or people. Because what we really need to chuck is that old school throwaway mindset. There's a new school of thinking on this stuff, and it's based on sustainability and equity, green chemistry, zero waste, closed-loop production, renewable energy, local living economies. It's already happening. Now, some say it's unrealistic, idealistic that it can't happen, but I say the ones who are unrealistic are those that want to continue with the old path. That's dreaming. Remember, that old way didn't just happen. It's not like gravity that we've just got to live with. People created it, and we're people too. So let's create something new.
That's one way of telling the story. They got 20 minutes, you're only going to get 2. To save a bit of time, I won't go over the key statements again. Hopefully our memory lasts more than 8 minutes. But I thought that was a kind of interesting icon. And one thing that strikes me is that Protestant churches are terrible with our iconography and visual imagery. We're so wordy. But every now and then I come across something and think, well, what would it mean if that was, an icon hanging in every church, so that every time we sat down to worship, we kind of had in our mind, what's this, this possible alternative future, which is what the church is meant to be about. I think I said that the ecological New Testament, recycling, which of course is the Old Testament, because we never used to have throwaway stuff, because so the middle bit of the sandwich is this thing about the futures, religious and secular versions. I'll give you a very quick summary of it now, partly because usually I give this talk in secular audiences, whereas you're not going to find these four ideas particularly earth-shattering or anything, so I'm more just kind of reminding us of some of what's in our tradition. But if you go to unitedearth.org.au and look in the workshops bit, you can find links to the longer talks. And we've just done some season of creation resources, and one of those sermons is another way of telling the story. I also read a book that hasn't got anywhere yet, called Easter Horror Stories, which is a very different way of telling the story, but when we were doing the year of Mark, and looking at the Old Testament stories of salvation that are there, and then the New Testament ones, it began to really fascinate me who's in and who's out whenever we read these stories. Because in just about every story of salvation in the Old and New Testament, somebody misses out. I mean, that's kind of almost a given, and it's worth kind of asking who. So, if we look at the four versions that I want to run through, one is the kind of the Noah story. And in Australian slang, Noah was a bastard, really. Maybe a gutless one, maybe a selfish one, but the gist of the story is that when Noah was warned that the sea levels were rising, he built a boat, got his family on board and sailed away and left everyone else to doom. So it's very much a story of, as long as it's all right with me and mine, then it's all right. Everybody else misses out. And, alarmingly, about 40% of churches believe that's actual history, that God murdered everyone on the planet, just about, and that Noah sailed away, and that we're all descended from him and his family. Which we could talk another time about the images of God contained in the scriptures and just what it would mean if that's really the way God solved big problems by killing everyone. But it has had a lot of currency in Australia and politics, it seems to me, over the last 20 years, with various Christian prime ministers of Liberal and Labor stripes, basically saying, here we are on Ark Australia, nice and safe. There's some bad people out there that have brought the woes upon themselves, but as long as you vote for us, we will keep you safe. We'll make sure nobody gets on this ark unless we approve of them, which generally means there are enough like us that we're willing to accept them. And as long as you don't rock the boat and risk being kicked off, you can stay on this ark with us, and as long as we're okay, it's all okay. The advantage that Noah had in his ark was that it didn't have any portholes, so once he was on board and shut the door, presumably he couldn't hear the screams and the woes of everyone drowning around him. In these days of social media, you've got to be pretty hard-hearted to sit here on Ark Australia and not notice what's happening to other people around the world or care what's happening to them. I'm pretty sure everyone in this room would be on board with the idea that that's not actually a vision of salvation that we're happy to live with, that we'll just keep Australia safe and forget about everyone else. But that is certainly part of our faith tradition. Just worry about yourself. As long as you're okay, it's all okay. And you do need to act in response to that belief, but it's very selfish action. Another one is the kind of sweet chariot idea that we'll be rescued and we'll escape from this place. When I first became a Christian in my 20s, it was pretty much along the traditional story of, I was condemned to hell, but if I believed the right things and confessed the right things, then I would get to fly up to heaven with the angels and be saved. And in fact, my friend was kind of explaining that was what was going to happen to him, and that heaven must be a great place because he knew that I'd be down here suffering and eventually burning in hell. But in heaven he wouldn't care about that, so heaven must be a really awesome place for him not to care about me anymore. And I found that persuasive at the time. The problem is there are so many Christian sects out there and other religions that working out exactly what you need to believe can become quite tricky because we don't all agree with each other on that stuff. And some of us might have come from church backgrounds that were very clear about what you needed to believe and do to be part of the crowd and get into heaven, but they often contradicted others. And as someone who for the last 20 years has kind of skated on the edge of orthodoxy at the best of times, that's actually kind of a worrying scenario now that might be where I put my hope. But more seriously, as an early Christian, I met a lot of people with mental illnesses when I visited a friend in a hospital, and was just struck by the fact that we could sit in a circle one week and sing songs of praise to Jesus, and the next week they'd be saying that God was an asshole. The week after that, maybe one of them thought they were Jesus. And so really, in my mindset and my theology at the time, it depended which day these people died as to whether they'd go to heaven or hell. And so that kind of broke apart that hope for me. And the secular alternative, I guess, would be, you know, the NASA one. But when I rang NASA to see if I could get on one of these spaceships that's going to go and colonise Mars, it turned out that I don't have either the physique or the income to get myself a place on there. So if humanity's salvation lies in the stars, almost none of us are saved. Almost all of us are out. In fact, looking around this room, we probably all are. But the best hope is that we might get, you know, a few thousand people into space and start a new colony while the Earth's ecology just falls apart. Which, you know, seems to me we'd just be better off investing money in this planet that we already know about. But it also kind of has this sense of faithful waiting that, you know, all you have to do is believe the right stuff and just wait to be rescued. So there's not much for humans to do apart from kind of stay orthodox. Another, that's not a very biblical idea either, the idea that we're going up to heaven, which even the Sydney Anglicans agree with me on, so I was quite pleased about that. Because the biblical image of salvation overwhelmingly is that God's going to come down here and fix everything. And so in Revelation, the heavenly Jerusalem that we heard about this morning, not the earthly one, the heavenly one comes down. It's as big as the Roman Empire when you read its dimensions. It's massive. So it's just going to come down, replace the Roman Empire, and get rid of, you know, the oppressor, and God will wipe away every tear from our eye, and we'll just live happily on earth. The secular equivalent of that is basically the idea that, you know, some godlike corporation will come along and save us. A mining company will come to town and everyone will have jobs. Finally, we'll make enough money that we can fix the environment that we destroyed in the first place by getting the jobs. So that idea that if we just, in this scenario, it's about being rescued here, but again, it's a kind of faithful, passive waiting and get out of the way. So, you know, the Essenes waited in their little community for God to come back and save them. The early Christians are encouraged in the scriptures to just endure and hold on and be faithful, because any day now Jesus is coming back to save them. I think the year 2000 was the last year we could possibly hold on to that hope as Christians, that maybe Jesus was coming back. It's just kind of getting embarrassing now, so I think we have to move on from that hope. And in the secular field, you know, the idea if you just get out of the way and cut this green tape and red tape and let companies get in and let the economy work properly, we'll all be saved and we'll all have prosperity. And you know, if these rabid greenies would stop running around slowing things down, the world would be a much better place. So the only problem, this is a good story in that you don't have to do anything about it apart from get out of the way and be patient. The problem with the story, as I said, on the religious side, 2,000 years seems like long enough to wait for God to bring the heavenly Jerusalem down. And on the secular side, strangely enough, it seems that when corporations owned by shareholders get their way, they don't actually distribute the wealth amongst everyone in the area. They seem to keep accumulating it. Which leads me to a little clip that I'll show you. It's, if I'm remembering right, it's quite rude, but it's an explanation of trickle-down economics and the idea that all we need to do is get out of the way of corporations in order to be saved. And hopefully, except I'm not on the internet, I'll show you at the end. The fourth kind of future in the secular world is the transition town model that basically says we can't keep doing this forever. Nobody's going to save us. We're going to have to do something about it ourselves. And it basically means that people that are consuming lots of resources are going to have to consume less. So the people that don't have enough resources can consume more, and we can work out some kind of transition into the future, which is going to involve cost and sacrifice on behalf of people who have lots of stuff like me. But it's the only alternative to some kind of apocalyptic, either Noah-like or even worse than Noah-like future. On the Christian side of things, it seems to me that's probably called something like doing what Jesus said we should do. again, when I became a Christian, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and just about all of his teachings were basically there to make us feel guilty about the fact that we weren't living up to his standards, so that we realised we were hopeless sinners, so that we pray for forgiveness and then get into heaven. It was probably 10 years before, maybe less than that, let's say 5. I'd like to think it was only 5 years before I kind of came across the idea that actually when Jesus told his followers to do things, he thought they might do it. And that what he said about wealth, he actually meant us to take seriously. So yes, somewhere around that idea of the kingdom of heaven being something that's not up there, but actually something Christians are meant to be living out in the present, and that's meant to be, if all Christians were living Jesus' teachings, even as interpreted for the 21st century, we'd be living in a very different world now. So back over to you, and I realise this is a post-lunch workshop, so I don't want to talk for too long at any one time. Is it 3 o'clock we have to finish?
Yeah.
3 o'clock we have to finish. Alright, okay, forget that exercise then. So, what I would have done is basically get people again in pairs going, where do we recognise those 4 stories in society? But maybe having been reminded of them as you go about the rest of your day or week, you'll see them like this, the first one, the kind of appeal to our selfish nature that, you know, we will deliver good stuff to you at the expense of others and don't worry too much about it. Or the idea of rescue and living in a town like Ballingen up on the mid-north coast. You meet plenty of people who have escaped Sydney or somewhere like Sydney and found their promised land up there. I went as a call of God, so I'm exempt from that, but other people. Or Revelation, you know, it would be no surprise, that idea that, you know, the corporation's constantly playing, if you just get out of our way, we will save you. And then, yes, you're probably all familiar with Jesus. So we can either jump ahead to try and create the 2-minute stories yourselves, or I can play you the story of solutions, tell you a little bit about how Donald Trump's such a master persuader, and then leave you over the rest of the day and week to kind of think about how you would digest that into a story. So what are people...
Yeah.
There's probably a good thing to place in the solution. So why don't you just stand up if you feel like standing up and turn around in a circle and re-oxygenate, and then I'll play you the story of solutions, which I think it's only like a 10-minute bit. Typically, this is actually the time when we should be taking a nap for about 20 to 30 minutes. All right, so have a seat. And the story of solutions, I mean, it's great as it is in terms of a follow-up to that first story. But also, living my life kind of in the environmental and church spheres, it also strikes me as a real... the Story of Stuff has a whole Bible study with it. If you go to the Story of Stuff website, they have a church study series that goes along with it, which is really good. But you know, lots of churches are facing resource shortages, decline, exhaustion, fear of the future, and so on, in the same way that people are in the environmental sphere. So this clip for me is also useful just if you're having a church consultation context or something, or wanting to talk about the future of the church in terms of what is it we're actually wanting. So this one's encouraging us to think not just what's the solution, but what's the actual goal that we're trying to achieve, so that we can then work out what solutions fit.
One of these? Of course not. This thing is 5 years old. Now everyone's got one of these. Can you imagine how much genius and focus it took to turn a music player into a handheld computer phone GPS remote control for everything in life in just 5 years? Seriously, the thousands of people who made this thing had to solve thousands of problems that literally could not have been solved 5 years ago. That's what people can do when they're motivated to find solutions to problems. But the problems we've been busy solving are not the problems that most need solving. So much focus has gone into faster, cheaper, newer that we've actually lost ground on things like safer, healthier, and more fair. It's as if we're getting better and better at playing the wrong game. And in many ways, this system is a lot like a game, but with very high stakes. Just like a game, our economy was designed by people to get everyone to play by certain rules. And like a game, it comes with instructions telling us what the goal is. Think about the last time you played a new game. Remember? The first thing you did was find out what it means to win, and that guides every decision you make along the way. So naturally, the solutions most people are working on pursue this game's simple goal, and that goal is more. More money being spent, more roads being built, more malls being opened, more stuff. That's what economists call growth. So we take all the money spent on stuff that makes life better and all the money spent on stuff that makes life worse, and we add it together into one big number called GDP. We're told that a bigger GDP means we're winning. So it's the number that thousands of rules and laws are designed to increase. But there's a big difference between more kids in school or more kids in jail, more windmills or more coal-fired power plants, more super efficient public trains or more gas wasted in traffic jams. Duh! But in this game of more, they're counted the same. Now, we can't change a game this dumb one rule or one player at a time. The problem is the goal itself. We need solutions that change that. What if we built this game around the goal of better? Better education, better health, better stuff, a better chance to survive on this planet. That's what we all want, right? So shouldn't that be what winning means? Changing the goal of the entire economy is a huge task. Of course, we can't do it all at once. But when we focus on game-changing solutions, we gradually make it possible for a new game to be played. To do that, we have to be able to tell the difference between a game-changing solution or just a new way to play that old game of more. For example, let's look at two solutions to one of the many problems we face today: the scourge of plastic packaging that everyone knows is a disaster for the planet, especially the oceans. And here are two groups of people with very different ideas of solutions to the plastics problem. These guys decide that enough is enough, and they start by launching a citizen campaign to ban the plastic bag in their community. These guys have a different solution. They start a business that gives people gift cards to buy stuff if they recycle their plastic waste. Both of these are happening right now, but only one of them changes the game. The gift card solution does keep some plastic out of landfills and incinerators, but it creates more plastic by encouraging people to buy more stuff. Even worse, it teaches that more consumption is the right reward for being a good citizen, making it even harder to think outside that old game box. The ban the bag solution is harder to achieve, but it's a game changer. Why? Well, by volunteering their time, these citizens are declaring that there's something more important to them than just earning and spending more. To win this campaign, these citizens are going to have to team up with forward-thinking businesses offering alternatives to throwaway plastic packaging. They're going to have to build power to fight back against the American Chemistry Council, which lobbies for the companies that make all that plastic junk. And they're going to have to get out and talk to their neighbors and friends, inspiring yet more people to begin to question the old game. This is exactly what's happening in towns and cities all across the world, and they're winning. But can banning a few million plastic bags transform the goal of the game? By itself, no. But in combination with millions of others working on game-changing solutions that they care about, yes. Together, these solutions are beginning to turn the tide. As people build power to change the game, their citizen muscles grow. They work to ensure the local solutions they create get copied and scaled up. And when they see these solutions getting blocked by corporations with way too much influence, they team up with other solutionaries to fight for a real democracy, by the people, for the people. Gift cards will never do that, but thousands of citizen campaigns can. Whenever I'm asked to join in on a solution, I want to know if it's transformational. Will it change the goal? To figure it out, I use the word goal. I want to know that it, G, gives people more power, taking power back from corporations to build democracy. O opens people's eyes to the truth that once basic needs are met, happiness and well-being don't come from buying more stuff, but from our communities, our health, and a sense of purpose. A accounts for all the costs it creates, including the toll it takes on people and the planet. In other words, it internalizes costs instead of externalizing them, as most businesses do today. L lessens the enormous wealth gap between those who can't even meet their basic needs and those who consume way more than their fair share. When I see a solution that does all that, or can be redesigned to, I'm in. And they're popping up everywhere. Like the Evergreen cooperatives in Cleveland, where worker owners are running green businesses, a laundry, a solar company, and a super productive urban farm that are healthy and safe. They provide secure jobs to people that the old game has left behind. We all know we need to get businesses out of our democracy, but cooperatives go even further and bring democracy into the businesses. Sustainable, democratic, and equitable, that's a game changer. Or in Caponori, a town in Italy where local citizens, working with businesses and governments, are not just seeking to manage waste better, but they're questioning the very inevitability of waste. They're promoting solutions to waste, not with expensive techno fixes, but by working together as a community to reclaim compost for the soil, to find reusable substitutes for disposable products, and then to put discarded material to good use. They've already reduced some waste streams by 82%, while creating jobs and building social fabric. And how about the new trend of collaborative consumption, formerly known as sharing? Sharing may sound like the theme of a Barney song, but think about it. It's a huge challenge to the old game. It gets us off the treadmill of more, conserves resources, gives people access to stuff they otherwise couldn't afford, and builds community. What's it look like? Bike share programs in major cities. Online platforms that let us share everything from our cars to our homes to camping gear. In my town, the public library system lends out tools. There's just no reason that every house needs its own power drill, creme brulee torch, scanner, wheelbarrow, bike pump when we can share. As transformational solutions like these gain traction, we will reach a tipping point if we keep focused on the new goal of better. Without a new goal, all the work we're doing to build a better future will be A, not enough, and B, really hard. Too much genius and focus will continue to go to solving problems like iPhone battery life, while the problems that threaten human life spin out of control. 5 years ago, when we made the story of stuff, we started building a community of people who sensed that something was really wrong with this old game. We agreed there was a problem. Now it's time to build the solutions. Solutions that won't just change a few of the rules, but will change the entire game. Want to help? Come on, let's do it.
So just the obvious point there, what we think winning is kind of affects the way we play the game. I want to make sure we've got a few minutes to get downstairs. So let me just do the little Donald Trump bit. With not quite enough time to do it properly, I read this book called Win Bigly by the guy who does the Dilbert comics, if you've ever read them, a very kind of cynical office worker comic. But he's really impressed by Donald Trump as a persuader. So doesn't share his politics necessarily, although I think he might not be too far off. But he's focused on how it is that Donald Trump managed to become president of America and stay there. And the book goes through this chapter by chapter, so I've just highlighted a couple of things in there. And the rather depressing subtitle is Persuasion in a World Where Facts No Longer Matter. But I think we can, even if we believe facts do matter, there's still the issue, okay, how do we make those facts persuasive? Okay, because clearly it's not enough to just tell people facts anymore, like Donald Trump has just been riding over the top of them. So some of the main things that come out of it is that we tend to reciprocate favours. So if you can make someone feel that you've done them a favour, we're kind of hardwired to want to reciprocate that. So maybe in telling the story of what's going on, we can point out the fact that the Earth is actually doing us all a massive favour all the time. people are influenced by direction, not by the current state of things. And Donald Trump spends almost no time talking about what's actually going on in America. He just talks about what he's going to do, where things are heading and where they're going to get to. And that was a little bit in that video there, the story of solutions. It was like, look, there's the goal. People get excited about the goal. So yes, we need to tell people what's actually going on, but more it's telling people where we could be heading. This idea of reading people's minds, which is more just about, you know, if we really think about what's going on in the lives of the people that we're trying to talk to and persuade, and understand what they think the actual problems are, then obviously that gives us an in. And it's something we should be doing anyway, because we ought to be wanting to understand what's going on in people's lives. At our recent assembly, a couple of people from the farming community got up and felt that the climate change resolution was basically targeting farmers because it was a bunch of city people sitting back in the comfort of their cities, driving their cars and drinking their lattes and condemning farmers for climate change, which it wasn't, but it was interesting that that was the trigger and the way that they're feeling. Leave out anything that might alienate people. So, you know, for me, much as I love the story of evolution, knowing that 40% of Christians think it's actually, you know, complete anathema, I tend not to start there. I tend to try and start with common experience of the earth. The visual versus non-visual, that even if it's words, if we can kind of create images and vision for people, then they're more likely to engage with what we're saying. And Donald Trump makes direct requests often in his speeches. It was pointed out, I mean, there's an ask that he's kind of asking people to do, to get on board with people, to do this, that, the other thing. Just kind of telling people what's going on is one thing, but actually, you know, if we're wanting people to respond, giving an invitation to respond, as the evangelicals did when you know, you're going to heaven, go to hell, but you can respond to go to heaven. And Donald Trump repeats himself an awful lot, which isn't because he's forgetful or senile or anything, but because by the time he's finished talking, people remember it, whether they started out agreeing with it or not. They kind of remember the message, which, you know, can make us less fearful of the fact that we feel like we're saying the same thing over and over again, because sometimes that's just what it needs. So I'm not going to be able to give you any time to turn that into a 2-minute story. I'll get to you in just a second, but that's the whirlwind tour of the workshop, which should probably be a 3-hour workshop, but hopefully input's kind of going to burble around in our minds, and whatever was persuasive and most useful for us will still have stuck with us in, you know, a couple of hours' time by the end of the day. And as we engage with the rest of what Joe has to say, hopefully we'll have some other kind of filters to listen to what he's talking to us about. Ian.
My thought is that Donald Trump is not our politician. He lives over on the other side of the world. Even if he comes on the TV, I don't listen to him. You know, Malcolm Turnbull was our Prime Minister. I don't. And
Could be a short time, I think.
Yeah, but Ian,
But I think we don't need to look too far to see Donald Trump's techniques being used by politicians.
that's right.
in
That's
Australia.
what we're learning. We're looking at the technique that he's using to persuade people,
And that was what the point Joe made last night. I think that the more successful Donald Trump is, the more politicians around the world are starting to look at him and going, what's this guy doing that's working for him? And I think we'll see, you know, we've seen the ex-Prime Minister still trying to have a go at power from the side using some Trumpy techniques.
you would hope that Bill Shorten would, in our wildest dreams, if Bill Shorten was to get elected next, federal election,
I think Jason's
that he
being
would not follow suit necessarily
No,
after Donald Trump.
no, I was thinking more of a swing back to Tony Abbott, but just quickly and then we better get down to it.
Jason, just what's leaving me slightly uncomfortable with this discussion is that the predominant paradigm from both the left and the right in this country is still for increased consumerism.
Mm.
It's about paying the workers more so that they can purchase more. And it doesn't matter whether the paying the workers more comes from the left or whether it comes from stimulation of small business and big business by giving them tax relief. The reality is both sides of the political divide are pushing for increased consumerism. And the flip side is if you don't push for that, then you're pushing for contraction, which ends up with the poor becoming poorer. So how do we move forward with this when there's no really alternative voice?
That's a great question to ask when we've got 5 seconds left. I don't think either of the major political parties have shifted the conversation from law to better at all. So maybe that can be our afternoon tea conversation. Shelley, have you got something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think from what I've seen of the left, I think no, on the contrary, I don't think the left at all is pushing for more consumerism. I think the left is pushing, you know, it is very much like a lot of Christian progressives is pushing for to take care of the planet, take care of people. From my experience, and you know, I've been a lefty for many years.
I think you're talking about
Yeah. So I think it's not necessarily good to put everybody in the same category.
Are those two abbreviated versions, are they up on YouTube? Can we get a bit of what we've just seen?
Yes, it's all there. So if you go to that unitingearth.org.au and just look at the workshop, there's a workshop link there, and it's all there. And if you look up honest government ads, I think is the clip I was going to show you. Some people have been doing some very cheeky things about what would government ads look like if they actually told us what they were up to.